There's another question.
I've got another question for you guys. So my responsibility is to ask some hard questions, and I don't mean to, we've talked over some of these questions, and I don't mean to offend or surprise anyone, but so let me just start with the obvious question, what we discussed a little bit. And does someone need to be Indian to understand or appreciate native-made art?
I'm half Indian, and I'm 3 separate tribes of Indian, and I'm half white. So, to me, I'm kind of teaching myself what native art is. I still think I'm in that instructional stage in which I'm trying to find out what is native and what is not. But I don't think that when people look at my artwork that they necessarily have to come across with this idea that well, it's made by a native person, it's made by a Comanche, or it's made by San Ildefonso man. That's not what's important to me. What's important to me are the things that are around me, the things that I hold dear, things like religion, the things that we all have that are very specific to us. And to me, that's what's the most important thing. So whether or not a viewer really comes across and saying, wow, that's a great native artist, you know, to me, that's not my goal. My goal is to make art. And if they want to associate me with native art, that's fine. If they want me to associate me with something else, that's fine too. To me, the categorization just confuses a lot of things. And it confuses dialogue, it confuses people's perspectives, and so that's how I look at that question in specific.
I too am a wonder mutt. I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the tribe that I'm enrolled on is actually 3 tribes that I had to band together. So, you know, plus I'm Lakota, plus Norwegian, plus Austrian. And I think the notion of, okay, what I'm not is, I'm not Native American, you know, whatever that is. That is such a, like, umbrella kind of notion, you know, it's totally a made-up thing. I'm these guys, you know, I'm those, if you wanted to know who I was, as far as, you know, blood lineage goes. But it's an interesting question, because the idea of native art is, I mean, if you look at these names across here and where we're from, it is as vastly varied as we are. You know, we are all different people. So the notion of, you know, native art as being something that can be picked up by, or that it's one group of people, I think has been kind of one of the tragic things for Native Americans, is that we have been lumped together as a one nation. You know, I can associate with Tewa, you know, I can relate to some of the things, but it's not, you know, my peeps are river people from up in North Dakota. Like, you know, there's a geological drive. When I just came back from North Dakota, and every time I go home, that's home. You know, I've lived in Seattle, Phoenix, here, lived all over the place, but what remains home are those, you know, the Missouri River, the rolling hills, you know, like every time I go back, it's that same thing. I know where to find the clay, you know, I know where all of these things are. And if there was something that's distinctly different, is that we have a geomancy here. You know, and much of our religion and philosophy is based on this environment, you know, and I think that's something that, I guess, like non-Native Americans longed for, you know. I mean, that's where all of the whatever the national parks and stuff that were set aside were to create this notion of American belonging to these spaces, you know.
Well, let me put this out to you. Do you know, like, Tamarind Institute?
Yes, I've been there.
Or Landfall Press here in town? Well, the artist is heavily involved in making the matrix or whatever to make the print, but they don't have any work in the actual process. So to me, in a sense, that's detaching them from making each piece itself, but they do sign it, and each one is considered an original by them. So to me, I think that's kind of a cross between what you're trying to ask, as opposed to offset lithography, where you just have one piece of artwork and then you have thousands of them made. which I think is an interesting question about where you leave off your hand, say like with Tamarind Institute, but you still claim it as your own. So I think that might answer your question. That's something that I have in mind as a printmaker, anyway.
I understand.
Gerald?
I know a prominent artist in town participates in Indian Market, and he was asked by museums and others to push the envelope, to do something different. And he did something that was very tough. It was subject matter that was difficult to handle. And much of the art he had to cover over. People didn't want it, they didn't buy it. He went back to doing what he'd always done. So my question is, what pressures are there on you to do what has become popular and what you know will sell?
The question is, artist, this particular artist, a museum liked the person's work and said, well, push the envelope, and the artist decided, well, I'll do something slightly different, and the person decided they didn't like that as much. And does that happen? What does that mean when that happens to people, I guess is the question.
He couldn't sell the work.
He couldn't sell the work any longer.
There is pressure on an artist to do what is popular and what everybody wants.
The pressure of popular art, what sells, so, and then asking an artist to push the envelope, and the push doesn't work very well.
I guess I'm an expert on art that doesn't sell. But it seems like back to quality, we have two major ways to assess quality that we know about that are public in the native art world. And one is the judging, the competitive judging, and then one is museum purchases and being included in museum collections. So I love Indie Market. I find the judging very intriguing, but it doesn't really reward content. It's real fast-paced. You don't get a lot of discussion. You don't get to read anything. You don't get to quiz the artist. And it's interesting, I got to go to a very prominent local artist's house recently, and I saw the most beautiful work in the world, you know? And he's like, well, this is different from what I normally do. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. This is what I'm different from what I normally do, and it didn't sell. But so I bet if you go to every single artist's house, you'll see beautiful, gorgeous work that doesn't fulfill the stereotype. But that's why the museums are there, to also have a dialogue about quality, and you have more time, you have more verbiage, you have people that are able to write about it, so you can go a little further in depth. Because I think content is a really important aspect of quality that's sometimes overlooked. You don't have to take it.
I think just right then, thinking outside of Indian Market, one of the projects that I worked on before was a piece talking about the artist under the porch in the plaza. And it's highly competitive to be a participant in that program, and it's highly regulated. And so the artists go through inspection for quality material. They have to turn in their certificate of Indian blood, and they get constantly sort of policed, in a sense, to think about authenticity of using real materials. But the artists there, in the interviews that I've conducted, very much make art for the market. During Christmas, you can see sort of Santa Claus, Christmas tree ornaments. During Easter time, you see bunny rabbit pins and lapels and bolo ties and toe rings and guitar picks and things of that sort. But it's sort of highly regulated to be authentic, but the way it gets conveyed is for a tourist market. And it wasn't always the case that silver and jewelry was the predominant item there. Historically, it used to be pots sold under the porch. Many tourists don't buy pots coming into Santa Fe who just want to travel. It's hard to pack in their suitcase, right? So there, bracelets, earrings, necklaces, rings of that sort become sort of a way to sell items towards the market. And so it's very much about buying into that, and from an authentic material that's policed from a state institution run by the Museum of New Mexico. And so that's another way to think about the Indian market outside of what happens in August, right? As a way to make a living and sort of think about those questions that you asked.